afternoon, everyone. I'm Dennis Layton. I'm Professor and Dean in the Jindal School of Languages and Literature. Welcome to the 2024 Jindal School of Languages and Literature commencement event. That should have been changed on the slide. It's called Commencement Lecture, but it does, of course, include a lecture by our guest speaker of the day, who is Professor Shoikat Majumdar from Ashoka University. I'm happy to welcome all of you, and a special thank you to our Vice Chancellor, Professor Siraj Kumar, our Dean of Admissions, Professor Upasana Mahanta. I hoped our registrar will be here. Perhaps he'll show up. This event is a very important one, both for the school and the university. Various people here, of course, represent different constituencies of the university, but we're all one university. Special welcome to the incoming batch of the BA Honors English program, that is those who are joining in 2024, and there's some senior students here as well, and welcome to the school, the faculty of the School of the Jindal School of Languages and Literature, and also faculty friends from other schools of the university. The program, of course, involves several speaking parts by officials of the university, and my role at this point is simply to say a little bit about the past of the School of Languages and Literature and its events. The school was officially inaugurated in 2021. We had an inauguration event on the 23rd of September, which featured Professor Elisabetta Marino, Professor of English and American Literature at the University of Rome, Tor Vergata, who spoke to us about teaching literature in precarious times. We also had an address on the same occasion by Dr. Oscar Pujol Rimbaud, who was at that point the director of the Instituto Cervantes, or the Spanish Cultural Center of New Delhi, who spoke to us about the world of Spanish cultural production. Our first actual commencement was on the 7th of September 2022, where our guest speaker was Professor Suborno Chatterjee of the Department of English of the University of Delhi, who spoke about English studies in India, past and present. And last year, on the 2nd of August 2023, our second commencement event featured Professor Simi Malhotra, who was then head of the English department at Jamia Millia Islamia in Delhi, who spoke on the relevance of literary studies in today's world. Let me just say a few more things, although there will be a formal introduction of the speaker by my colleague Akshay Kale. Professor Shoikat Majumdar is, as the slide shows you, in case you're not aware of that, a novelist, a critic, and an academician. I just wanted to point out that I had the great pleasure of participating with him in the JGU World University Summit earlier this year, which included, it was an online event, which included more than 20 panels, as I remember, involving several dozen distinguished academicians from around the world. And on that occasion, Professor Majumdar did talk about humanities in a post-truth world. So I'm not completely unacquainted with what he's going to speak about today. He's also written and spoken on issues of post-truth in relation to the humanities. So this should be an enlightening and very interesting and thoughtful exploration. I now invite our Vice Chancellor, Professor Siraj Kumar, to say a few things. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis, for those kind words, and congratulations to the incoming class of 2024 of the Jindal School of Languages and Literature. It's one of our newer schools, and I am delighted to welcome a wonderful group of students who have passionately considered the idea of pursuing literature. In a way, as a university which is deeply committed to the study of liberal arts, humanities, and social sciences, we are very delighted that we continue to be connected to the world of humanities in a number of ways, and one of the ways by which we do that is to offer programs such as the BA Honors in English Literature, and I see a steady increase in the kind of interest that this school has generated over the years. Although I must say that we should be doing more work to build a greater degree of public consciousness, especially among high schoolers, to consider the possibility of pursuing literature. When I was in college, BA English Literature was one of the more popular courses among the students. I think it is fair to say that the evolution of the Indian higher education system, and probably to some extent the larger obsession to pursue STEM education among high school students, and then of course the possibility for seeking job opportunities which are more professional in nature, all of that has differently impacted the relatively lesser interest among students to pursue literature. Nevertheless, that has not in any way discouraged us to not only establish a school, probably one of the smallest schools in the university, but also to be committed to the idea of advancing studies in this field. We are also very delighted to welcome Professor Saikat Majumdar from Ashoka University, who will be speaking to us on the humanities in a post-truth world. Of course, as you know, when you are a Vice Chancellor in India, you need to be hopeful about it, and I hope that we are not yet arrived into the post-truth world. But nevertheless, it's important for us to discuss and debate these issues in a university context. I also want to extend a warm welcome to the faculty members of the Jindal School of Languages and Literature who come back from their break, but also the kind of intellectually engaging activities that happen in the school. This school's predecessor is actually the English language program that Dr. Batra and his colleagues so ably have led for many years. I think it is only fair to say that both these, imagination surrounding the center and the school has immensely advanced the interest relating to literature, in our university. I also want to mention that besides the fact that the school itself is small, the interest in relation to humanities, especially literature, is widespread in the university, and it's not confined to the students of this school itself. So, and I think that one of the things that we can and we should consider doing in the future is to look at cross-listed electives, both taught by faculty members of this school to other students, and other students taking courses at your school as well. For all the new students who are joining the Jindal School of Languages and Literature, be aware that as much as you are a small school and a small cohort, you are part of many large schools and a wider community in the university. The year 2009, when we began this journey, we were a relatively small university with only 100 students and 10 faculty members and 20 administrative staff. Today, our university has grown from that 100 students to over 13,000 plus students, from 10 faculty members to 1,200 plus faculty members, from 20 administrative staff to over 3,000 plus administrative staff. It's a larger community. I can only hope that you will get to meet people from other parts of India and around the world. Our students, both who are on campus as well as our online and blended programs, they come from over 105 countries. Our faculty members end up coming from over 51 countries, and both students and faculty are from all states and union territories of India. So it's a very diverse community that you are going to be part of, and I sincerely hope that you will make the best use of it. I also want to mention that unlike the typical college in India, which offers BA English Literature as a course or a program, we pride in the fact that we are a multidisciplinary university. As students of literature, you have an opportunity to do courses across the various schools of the university. Please do not hesitate to come out of your comfort zone and take courses in the other schools as well. Yesterday I was talking to the Dean of the Office of Academic Planning and Coordination and Interdisciplinarity, Dr. Gaganpreet Singh, and he mentioned to me that as of now we offer 500 cross-listed electives every day, which essentially means that students, regardless of whichever school or program they belong to, you can actually take courses with no additional cost in any of these other 11 schools and institutes that we have. And so this also gives you an opportunity to, take courses not only limited by this school, but also to look at your wider interests as you look at the future as well. I also want to take this opportunity to thank and appreciate the efforts of Professor Upasana Mahanta, the Dean of the Office of Admissions and Outreach, for essentially, ensuring that you take the right decision, and that is to recognize the kind of extraordinary opportunities that this university and the school has to offer for building your own aspirations and fulfilling them in the broader field of humanities, specifically in pursuing the BA Honours in English Literature program. I also think that the school itself is a very vibrant space. Faculty members, because it's a very small school, it's a very tight community. The faculty members not only are professors who teach courses, but they're also mentors of each one of you. And so your engagement with the faculty is going to be truly amazing given the small number of students and faculty in this school. So with those words, I want to once again congratulate each one of you for having been selected to be part of the Jindal School of Languages and Literature, and to wish you the very best for your future. I want to personally thank Dr. Majumdar for accepting our invitation and to be here to deliver the commencement lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I invite my colleague Akshay Kale to formally introduce our guest speaker of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Chancellor Dr. Siraj, for those uplifting words. It's always so encouraging to listen to him talk about the university ethos, and I think it's very important for our incoming batch to sort of inculcate this spirit of learning and be open to new disciplines, and also delve into their own field, which is literary studies. And hence, I think it's a great honor for us now today to have Dr. Shaukat Majumdar as the chief guest for our commencement lecture. So we have up till now, as Dean Dennis has introduced, as talked about the other speakers, we have had distinguished scholars and professors delivering these commencement lectures, but now we have someone whom I don't know whether to introduce as a professor writer or writer professor. He is a professor of creative writing and English at Ashoka University, but he's also a novelist. He has published 5 novels. He's an academic. He's a commentator on the arts, literature, and higher education. He's the author of 5 novels. The most recently published one was The Remains of the Body by Penguin Random House, The Middle Finger, The Saint of God, The Firebird, and Silverfish, which was his first novel published in 2007. He's also published a book of literary criticism, Prose of the World, The Banality of the Empire, and I was just talking to him that I'm teaching a course in modernism, and I will be teaching one of his essays on Joyce and Catherine Mansfield, and it's such an honor to have him in our midst, and I hope you can all make the most of his insights. He's going to speak on a very interesting theme, which I think is very relevant in today's times. He's also, apart from his literary criticism, he's written a general book on higher education called College Pathways of Possibility, and co-edited a series of essays, a collection of essays called The Critic as Amateur. I think the latest updated version of the same, or the next installment, The Amateur, has released a couple of weeks ago or a month ago. Prior to this, Dr. Majumdar also taught at Stanford University, and he writes regularly for The Telegraph, Times of Higher Education, Outlook, Scroll, and I mean, I have had the privilege and I've been tremendously enriched by his articles. He's a regular contributor to all these publications. And today he's going to speak on humanities in the post-truth age. I don't want to give away spoilers, but I think you'll all enjoy this talk immensely, and you'll find that we are in the midst of a landscape which is very promising, which appears bleak, but at the same time holds tremendous promise for the humanities. And I think the incoming students especially will find renewed motivation and vigor. And there was often criticism of literature students. I was one of them. I was repeatedly told why I didn't study anything else. I studied Spanish and I studied German as well. But I think after Dr. Shaukat Majumdar's talk, we'll all have some renewed insights, and we'll look forward to pursuing your BA Honours program. Over to you, Dr. Majumdar. I don't want to take much more time. Thank you.
When you have a great introduction, you feel like you have nothing more to say after you've been introduced so well. But so I'm really glad to be here. Let me just find a way to put this down. Really glad to be here. Always good to be back in Jindal. There's so many moving parts in this university that you come 5 times, you feel like you've been to 5 different universities. So it's so much bigger than Ashoka, which is tiny compared to, you all. I especially want to thank Professor Dennis Layton for inviting me. I was very happy to accept this, and Professor Rajkumar, Vice Chancellor, for welcoming me. And welcome all of you. And I wanted to talk a bit about something capacious, something large, and yet something that you can take away with. And I want to start by saying that, the bitterest battles in the world today are being fought in the humanities. It might surprise you, but it seems like, it's not important. But actually, we are fighting some really big battles. And this was always the case, emotions, ideas, beliefs, faith, ideology. These were always strong bones of contention, along with things like land, wealth, food, technology, all of these material things, very concrete things. So when you look at the overall need of human beings, what we really need, whether it's health, freedom, and development, they always need both. They need these emotional things, they need ideas, they need ideologies, which are the domain of the humanities. And they also need the kind of very material things, food, technology, wealth. And that's exactly why we study both humanities and natural sciences at the university. And we also study the social, which makes us understand how individual human beings become part of a community. And that's how a university comes together. The humanities, the private, individual subjectivity, the social, the community, and the natural world. That is, in a very basic way, defining the part of the university. But what is happening today is, I think, the importance of the humanities has gone far beyond. And this might sound counterintuitive, but as a humanist, it makes me very worried. It makes me deeply ashamed. One should be very happy that my field is important, but this is a kind of importance which is really worrisome. And that's what I want to talk about. And for that, I'll step a little back in history. Just allow me. So most of the modern subjects we study today in the sciences and the humanities can be traced back to the European Enlightenment, many of them in a kind of important way. And the Enlightenment, as some of you know, as you will find out as you enter your classes, was a very interesting period in 18th and early 19th century Europe, when more 18th century, when everything we identify as modern today really goes back to that space. So the idea of the individual, private life, the idea of the modern nation state, that very much comes from the French Revolution after that. And very importantly, the idea of truth, rationality, reason. These are very much traced back. It's not like they were not there before, but they became really kind of accelerated. They took a certain concrete form. And here, of course, the iconic moment is Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics, as you all know, the Apple story, all the different apples, Newton's apple, then Steve Jobs' apple, and their apples are, and knowledge is kind of a biblical apple. They're always connected. And these are apocryphal stories, but apocryphal stories are also true in a different way. What happened was there's a new focus on reason and science, which had a wide impact from positivism in the social sciences to even the idea of interiority and originality in literature. If you think of someone like Shakespeare, Shakespeare did not think of himself as an artist. Shakespeare was, kind of, as my colleague at Ashoka, Jonathan Gale Harris, would say, he was the Elizabethan age's answer to Karan Johar, or Subhash Ghai. He was making money. He was out there to make masala movies. He was just doing all that. He never thought he was an artist. In fact, we didn't have the idea of the artist till around this time. That was very much an anachronistic application. And there's a whole different subject behind that. But the whole point was Shakespeare, a lot of people would say, was an extremely sophisticated plagiarist. He did not have ideas of his own. He did not have stories of his own. He took everything from myth and kind of the common domain. And that is true of everybody. Shakespeare, Homer, Valmiki, Vyas, all of these, nobody had this notion of, my idea, my story. So this is very much happening around this time, the Enlightenment, the idea of the individual, the idea of private property, the idea of copyright, intellectual property, all of these things are coming up. And this is how things are kind of getting started. So in a way, all of these things we take for granted today, but they were not always the case. this is the time things are kind of coming together. Even older knowledge forms, like from philosophy to medicine and literature, kind of got to get new centers of gravity, like literature got the idea of the author. And at the same time, the modern research university starts to get going. I mean, William von Humboldt, the German thinker, a follower of Kant, he started to think of the university, oh, it's not just a place you go to learn. It's not just a place of learning, but it's also a place where new knowledge is created. So the whole idea of the research university was created in the Free University of Berlin, and then it got moved to the US primarily through Johns Hopkins University, and then moved to the other universities, Harvard, Yale. So this was all this time, so all of the knowledges, all of the things that we take for granted today is really happening in the late 18th and the early 19th century. Now what is happening? This is all happening in the West. This is all happening in Europe, moving to America. What about the non-Western world? Now this enlightenment in the colonies is a very violent and a very contentious affair. Colonialism is an amazing thing that you dominate the lands, you take people's lands away, you fight with cannons and bullets, but you cannot control them unless you control their minds, unless you bring in soft power to follow up with the hard power. And that is what education does, that is what culture does, that is what literature does, religion does. So often in many of the colonies, for the first early pilot forces were people with Bibles, and people with, curriculum, education, and then the hard power and soft power, they kind of come to exist together. There's this wonderful saying by the Kenyan writer Ngugi wa Thiong'o, whom some of you might have read. He says, the night of the sword and the bullet was followed by the morning of the chalk and the blackboard. So you win the battle, and then suddenly you bring out the blackboard and the chalk. The education starts. And that is where soft power. So the colonized must feel that I am dominated by a really superior power, a great civilization, And therefore the gratitude will create this kind of extended Stockholm syndrome, that I want to be here. It's my... And the same way the white powers would this is the white man's burden. I'm not colonizing, I'm not ravaging, but I'm really spreading civilization. This is the rationalizing narrative behind colonialism. And this is not just the early colonialism, even globalization, all of this. Later on, there's always a rationalizing narrative. So this was a kind of a violent movement, and many people like Gayatri Spivak has called post-colonial culture the children of rape. And rape is something you can sort of hate the act, but you cannot hate the progeny. So post-colonial culture in some ways is like the child of rape. But at the same time, what happened was, even to take the case of India, there were all these new modernities. Modernities became local. They were indigenous modernities, which kind of rebelled against European modernity. They modified it, they revised it, and there are many movements of local modernities. I'll just take two examples. One is the Bengal Renaissance in early 19th century Bengal, which was a great movement of scientific revolution, social movement, Ram Mohan Roy abolishing sati, literary movements, figures like Rabindranath Tagore coming out. So that was one great movement in the 19th century. And then, of course, you take in the 20th century the progressive rightist movement, so the Urdu and Hindu literary movement, which is kind of a strongly anti-colonial Bloomsbury kind of a movement. So all of these movements are, what I'm trying to say is that the modernity which originated in Europe, kind of came to the colonies too. It was a violent process, it was not a peaceful process, and yet colonialism became entrenched by making modernities local. And that is how we become. We are sitting in this room today, we are speaking in English, we have a certain way of looking at the world, we have a certain scientific attitude, and this is always in conflict with the way things are. So the moment you go out, and we are obviously universities in Haryana, you go out and you see this incredible conflict. We are kind of, Anglophone Indians are kind of out of place. So this is our reality, and this conflict is the violence of modernity that we came with. And at the same time, our universities also, our public universities came out of this modernity. specifically, but it wasn't a smooth process. I mean, a lot of people say that the British did not really want to create a Humboldtian university. They didn't want the pastoral care of Oxford and Cambridge. What they want was to produce a lot of clerks very quickly. Very quickly. I mean, that the administrative service needed bureaucrats and clerks. And what do you need to do that? You need an examination-driven system. An examination-driven system is what qualifies people in a very short period of time. And that's exactly why we have this model of education still in our public universities, all about examination. It's all about how you consume knowledge. How you produce knowledge is not part of our education system. And this is something which I think universities like Jindal, Kriya, Ashoka, we are all trying to change. We are bringing back research. We are bringing the liberal arts classroom. But that's a different discussion. What I want to return to is the question of truth. Enlightenment sought the truth. That was very important. Truth, rational truth, and secular truth, not religious truth. So in a way, the Enlightenment was a turning away from a medieval culture, from even a kind of pre-Enlightenment, kind of reformist culture to a certain kind of rational truth. And that was partly because science was important. Science was very important at this time, and science very quickly led to technology. So obviously all of you know the famous story of sort of James Watt and the steam engine, and how he kind of saw his kettle, all these stories, apples, kettles, all these quotidian objects leading to great scientific discovery. It's very material. Science is very concrete. It's not happens in abstraction. The steam kettle kind of boiling over, and then the steam engine getting going. And that in some ways was a kind of a sort of proverbial moment of the Industrial Revolution that created wealth, that created a middle class, that created wealth on a scale, and capitalism quite literally went full steam ahead. That was when it kind of started charging. But here's the problem. This truth claim of the Enlightenment turned out to be actually quite limiting and quite problematic. Because a lot of people would say that, the truth comes from a certain position of privilege. If you're white, if you're male, if you're straight, if you're propertied, then all of this is fine, this is great. So for a lot of people, truth was, its race was too white, its sex was too male, its orientation was too straight, its status was too bourgeois. And when it came to Indian modernities, you replace the white with savarna, and everything else remains the same. So the knowledge structure, the reason, the truth that you think of as universal is not really universal. It is not the woman's truth. It is not the truth of the person of color. It is not the truth of the lower caste person. It is not the truth of the working class person. So this was a problem. And I think, for much of the 20th century, if you look at philosophy, critical theory of the 20th century, much of it is really the story of people wrestling with the notion of truth throughout the 20th century. Feminists have really sort of engaged with this Enlightenment truth and said that it's very male. Then people who are doing work on class, they've kind of talked, obviously worked on that. Then, then people who work on class and colonialism, they've kind of engaged with it throughout. So it was a very different, all this post-structuralist theory and all of that you might be reading in your English classes. It's really a long process of interrogation. And that's where we have this really interesting debate with the scientists, especially the mathematicians. They obviously have to believe in this absolute truth, and we're like, oh, come on, there's nothing like that. There's no absolute truth. Absolute truth is a question of privilege. It's a kind of a power. And they're like, what are you saying? A zero is a zero. So there are all these interesting debates which have kept the 20th century very lively. But what I want to point to is that truth was never abandoned. It was questioned, challenged, critiqued, but it was never really abandoned. But what I want to point to is that in the 21st century, we finally entered what is a lot of people call the post-truth world. Now, what is the post-truth world? How can you ever? Vice Chancellor just said that I hope we haven't reached the post-truth world. If there's truly a post-truth world, universities would have no function. And that is a challenge we are really facing. Is that, this is very simply, it's a point where people start saying, oh, I don't care about the truth. My opinions, that's all that matters. My emotions, I don't feel it. I don't care. This is all bullshit. Oh, I got this on WhatsApp. I know that's true. This is what happens when you reach the post-truth world. I want to very carefully distinguish it from the critique of truth, which was happening in the 20th century, which is a reservation of truth about coming from a place of privilege. This is not that. This is outright denial. This is outright dismissal of truth. And this is not coming, and why, it's almost, if you think about it, for a vast majority of people, expertise has become a dirty word. It's like, oh, don't trust the experts. Oh, they are just bullshitting you. Don't believe them. And I think there's a lot of reason behind it. I think in many ways, the march of globalization, the march of liberalization, they left out the people who won were the liberals and the new liberals. But the people who were left out were the angry people, the people who were rural, who were working class, who were somehow not part of this liberal bourgeois sort of section. And I think liberalism and neoliberalism have failed these people. They have really failed them. And this is something, this is a failure of the liberal bourgeois. And the first time, I think this has been going on for a long time, but the triumphal year, the kind of pivotal year here is 2016, which is also the year I moved from the US to India to join Ashoka. Interesting, that's not why truth failed, but still. There are two main reasons is the election of Donald Trump and the exit of Britain from the European Union, called Brexit. And both of these events in many ways are seen as the kind of real death blow on liberalism. That the failure, and if you heard this, if you followed the Trump campaign and it's happening again, the people who support Trump, it's often like, oh, we don't believe experts and all these intellectuals, all these people, all these liberals, they're terrible, just throw them out, what have they done for us? Education is bad, the universities are bad. You keep hearing this kind of narrative. And this is the post-truth sort of clangor that I'm talking about. There's a suspicion of anybody who knows, anybody who sounds smart, anybody who's educated. Very much all the economists said the British exit from the European Union would be deadly, but they didn't listen. They were like, no, we are English. And obviously, as we know, people in the south of England, Oxford, Cambridge, London, all the elites wanted to stay with Europe. People in the central, in the Midlands, north of England, the kind of industrial parts where people were disgruntled, people were not getting the benefits of liberalization. They said, no, we're going to be English, we're going to stay with that. And now, 8 years later, it's very clear, Brexit hasn't gone down very well. Economists were right. But nobody was in a mood to listen. Nobody was in the mood to actually pay attention to experts. Because why? Because we're in the post-truth world. Rational truth doesn't matter. I feel it's my racial pride that my Englishness will make me England. In the same way, Donald Trump, if you think of the Clinton era, their knowledge, Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar, suddenly the masses. And it's not just in this country, it's everywhere. It's very much a reality in India as well. The kind of suspicion of a knowledgeable, liberal leadership, which had a lot of problems, which I think had failed the masses in many ways, but I don't want to get into the debate. But what I'm trying to say is, what is happening today is while we talk about all these things like technology, data, AI, and all these different elements from the domain of the sciences, what is happening, popular action and even democratic behavior is actually being made by emotions, symbolism, and crucially identity. And especially identity rooted in religion, race, caste, to a lesser and more complex way, gender and sexuality. And these are the domain of the humanities. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is that the humanities are casting a very powerful, but a very insidious, a very damaging force in the world. The sciences, we think like, oh, this is all about technology. We are living in the age of technology. But that's not what is driving the people. If the moment you leave this room, the moment you go outside, people don't care about it. Okay, everybody has their smartphone and everybody using WhatsApp forward. But what kind of information is circulating on it? What kind? People are being driven by symbolism. So the study of language and rhetoric, religious studies, questions of history, questions of race, class, caste, gender, everything that is central to the humanities and the imaginative social sciences, the softer, the qualitative sciences. I'm not talking about economics and the hard data sciences, but softer social sciences like anthropology, maybe sociology. These are fields which are the ones which are crucial to understand what's happening in the world today. Because that is what is shaping popular action, not the belief in science and reason and truth, which we inherited from the Enlightenment. And that is the great irony. So the greatest battles in the world are those of ideology, right? There are a lot of battles for things like land, wealth, but in some ways, some of the most bitterest battles are actually ideological. Mao Zedong said that ideology is the greatest weapon, if you can keep with that. And that is something the 20th century saw clearly with the Cold War. So when you have a situation where a physical war will lead to destruction, which is what both Soviet Russia and the US realized, once you can't have a nuclear war because that will destroy the entire world, so the battle shifted to the mind. So the whole attempt is to capture the mind, to brainwash people, to create soft power. So, it's like you have, and this is a point where things like CIA, Central Investigative Agency, started sponsoring literary magazines. They started sponsoring talks and lectures. And Soviet Russia was doing the same thing. I was a child in Calcutta in the 1980s. I remember those issues of Soviet literature, all these Gorky Sadans, all of these, which are still there. But before 1989, they had a kind of a really powerful function. They had to spread the message of Soviet Russia around the world. Just the way America was all about fighting the Red Fear, the Iron Curtain. So capitalism, that. So it was really a battle of a way of life. It was a battle of ideology. And the battle came out in literature, in philosophy. It was again a battle that was being fought in the domain of the humanities. It was not being fought on the battlefield. In the same way today, if you think of China, what China has been doing, China is 21st century superpower, and China has been doing something very similar with the Confucius Institutes worldwide and with its focus on liberal arts and humanities within China. Liberal arts and education is big in China, but Western observers and people outside of China have often said that it's really to kind of spread the soft power of China to make it all over the world. When I was teaching in Stanford, I served in a search committee which was hiring a Confucius Institute professor. And they said, they are going to hire a white person. Why? They're going to hire a white person because they want to show that Chinese culture is now so big that white people are doing it. If they hire a Chinese person, that's not good enough. They need to hire a white person. So it was very interesting, the kind of soft power. The moment something becomes a world power, they must have their culture permeate the world. If you cannot dominate the world just with guns or even with money, you cannot dominate. You need culture. You need to culturally control. I mean, why do you think America was such a big superpower? Of course, because of its military power and everything, but because of something like Hollywood. And this is an old Marxist question, which comes first? Is your culture important because your guns are important? Or because your culture is important, your guns become more important? It's a chicken and egg question. No one really knows. Is Hollywood popular because of America or because America popular because of Hollywood? But either way, wherever you go, there's been this massive cultural imprint that is all over the world. So that is always there. And I think that is also true in India, what I've seen, and it's not just China. If you look at liberal arts education across Asia, and I've written on this subject quite a bit, in Korea, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, there's been this constant tug of war that what do we do with it? Singapore had this very interesting alliance with Yale University, and then it didn't quite go together because in some ways what it really means to be liberal, not just in education, but liberal as in free thought, did not quite go with Singapore, which is an extremely vigilant kind of a state. So Singapore is a classic example where you can economically be liberal, but not liberal in an ethical and political sense. So those contradictions are very much part of the Asian reality. And I think we've seen the same thing in India. Educational policy, has, the stamp of ideology is constantly here being enacted through the humanities, through history, through philosophy, through languages. You see that in the national education policy. You see that in government initiatives. There's always a kind of an attempt to do that. So what we have today is a state where there's a strange and dubious importance of the humanities, where we almost felt that people are going to vote for the symbolism of a temple over the reality of jobs. And thankfully, we seem to have averted it. People in that particular constituency actually have said, no, we do want jobs. Temple is fine, but we're not going to vote for that. And so when you vote for a symbolism, when you vote for a religious power, you're actually voting for something the humanities study, as opposed to a more concrete economic reality. And that has been, and not just in this, the historians' questions are being asked in the streets. They've gone out, they are all about YouTube rants and WhatsApp GAN. The kind of things which historians do in the academy are now everywhere. Everybody is a historian. Everybody has an opinion of when a building was made, whether it was a mosque or a temple, what it was, everybody knows it. So in a way you can see this kind of massification of the humanities outside. But again, it's running against the idea of expertise. Don't trust the experts. Don't trust the history professor. I know when this building was made. I know, it's in the family. This is the world we are living in, where everybody has an opinion. And nobody is willing to listen. Nobody is willing to listen. Nobody has any faith in training. So I think, the thing is that, if you think of some of the most loaded terms in our political sort of rhetoric today, anywhere, think of the words that are bandied around the most. Take the word freedom. The word freedom is a hugely loaded word. I was a student in New York when 9/11 happened and the whole, that second Bush government started the war on Iraq. And the word freedom was bandied around like anything. Oh, they're against freedom. They don't want the American way of life. They want to damage freedom. In the same way, look at the word outsider. Who's an outsider? This is a rhetoric you keep hearing in Europe, the kind of rising wave of intolerance against immigrants. In India, against religious minorities. Who's an outsider? Now, words like freedom and outsider are profoundly literary words and philosophical words. Writers and philosophers have spent centuries debating these words. Who's free? What is freedom? So these are literary and philosophical words which are dominating our public discourse way over the language of economics and science. Things like budgets, welfareism, and healthcare. Very important words. Select few are talking about them. The Anglophone educated people are talking about them. But the person on the streets, they're talking about the outsider. They're talking about freedom. They're talking about the kind of the emotional words. And it's like, and I'm saddened by it. It's like, oh, I don't want this to happen. I want them to talk about ideas, healthcare and budget. And it's not just that, it's also the method. The French philosopher Bruno Latour had this wonderful essay where he talks about how certain methods occupied the liberal humanists are taken over by the right wing. And he gives the example of some people, he's talking of the Republicans in the US. They're saying, global warming is a social construct. Global warming is a social construct. And we say things like that, gender is a social construct or sexuality is a social construct. Global warming is definitely not a social construct. It is a scientific fact. But so what you see is that the kind of liberal, not only liberal ideas, but liberal tropes, liberal ways of thinking, not just liberal, even left ways of thinking, are being co-opted. And that is what is becoming fascinating, that I think there's a kind of humanities expansion over the world, which is sadly very damaging. And that's exactly where I think you come into play. So what we have today is a kind of a very bitter war on cancel culture on one hand, and cancel culture is really, can be a very reductive movement where people refuse to read or watch or engage with anything that doesn't look like them. I'm brown, I'm black, I'm not going to read anything by a white person, I'm a woman, so I'll never read anything by a man. So kind of very reductive movement on one hand. On the other hand, an equally reductive and intolerant attack on the pluralist state. The attack against critical race theory in the US or against religious minority in India. We have this extremely polarized kind of a world. But the interesting thing is that the most violent and virulent form of this battle is being fought in the humanities and social sciences. Because sciences are not dealing with this question. Sciences are about more objective reality. There are things are happening in the sciences too, but the most bitter versions of this are actually happening in the humanities and the social sciences. It's happening in the pages of history books, what books to include in history, what textbooks of history and literature should be there in school curriculum. It is happening in through language and symbolism. And even the construction of science, whether we had missiles or spaceships in the ancient world, or whether the introduction of Ayurveda or yoga in medical schools, these are not scientific choices. These are really, they stem from narratives about national identity that are rooted in history, myth and fiction, which are all in domain of the humanities. Science in this world is myth and fiction. So it's really not about sciences. So what I want to say is that the humanities are more urgent than ever before, but it is an urgency and an importance that depresses me as a humanist. I want people to acknowledge the scientific reality of global warming. I want people to look at the economics of job creation and not just go with the falsity of language and aesthetic symbolism, fake claims of history, dangerous philosophies of self and groups. I want them to kind of turn away and be more scientific, longing for the scientific kind of claim of the Enlightenment for all its problems. And this is where you all come in. You all starting out in liberal arts, in humanities, in languages and literature. This is where you come in. You know, there is a certain, sometimes in architects of liberal arts education, there's a certain duplicity, both in governments and foundations and private industry. People want those very smart liberal arts graduate who can do numbers and language, who can do computer science, but can also do images and literature and music, but who are not really liberal in a political sense, who are not liberal in an ethical sense. You want liberal in a very narrow disciplinary sense. But you cannot handle liberalism as a principle. Now that contradiction doesn't work. This is the contradiction under which the Yale-NUS partnership broke down, because the Singapore government wanted the economy, wanted the benefit of the smart students, because they would create a great workforce. But the moment you're teaching students to make these interesting combinations, you're also teaching them to think freely. How do you create a student body who are smart enough to create wealth, who are critical enough to create wealth, but not critical enough to question power? That is the sort of balance, and that is an extremely hypocritical kind of a position to seek, and that is something which I think we've seen in many of our universities, even in India. And this is a big question for humanities, for especially in Asia. And I trust that you're coming into this world and you're going to go out of this world without these kind of chains and conditions, and if you do so, then you'll assume tremendous power and even greater responsibility. And I think it's all about taking hold of narratives and changing them as your true conscience tells you. Narrative as a device, it belongs to history and to literature. But these terms get co-opted. They get the word creative. We thought we had it. I teach in a department of creative writing, but it became a marketing word. So there's a creative marketing campaign, and then there's creative bookkeeping, which is a very dangerous thing, accounting. So when you do bookkeeping creatively, these kind of things get changed. And in the same way, I think, the reality and practice of narrative is lost today in a kind of narrow battle of identity and ideology. But as humanists, no one knows better than you the complexes and paradoxes of ideology and identity. This is something you'll deal with in your final papers, in your thesis. The big challenge is how to work with them in life, how to deal with them in your family, in your workplace, even in your school and housing community WhatsApp groups. How do you counter those narratives, the lessons that you're taking away from these classrooms? I think as long as there's humanity, the humanities will be central, for better or for worse. AI is the big wave all around us. It's everywhere and it's coming. But I think as far as we can see, AI will simply reflect both the virtues and vices of humanity. The writer of AI algorithms are but humans, and they will carry the prejudices as well as the good things of humanity. And this, just to give one example, a recent study, I think this is about a image making AI, I think, app has revealed the real prejudices, where I think whenever you ask, a scientist, they always show a white man. A poor person is always black. An Indian is always an old man with a beard. So you can see that these images are being generated by AI. But who wrote these algorithms? These algorithms are written by human beings, and they carry all human biases. Amazon had this AI-based employment app which were just rooting out all women applicants. to the point it had to be rooted out itself. So the point is, I'm not debating this political thing. What I'm saying is that you can see how AI contains human biases. As long as anything requires human subjectivity, and the question of subjectivity is fundamental to the humanities. And if AI has a subjectivity, it's a subjectivity created by human beings. Yet, we don't know the future, things might change. And the other thing is very clear, ideological battles will never vanish as long as human beings live. And the humanities are the place where you understand the fullness and the bitterness of the ideological battles more than in any other domain. I want to end this, just with a little nod to the question of aesthetics, which is, I think, at the heart of humanities, especially language and literature. Whenever we feel we are making an ethical or a political judgment, we are often making an aesthetic judgment. The aesthetic is at the core. We don't think of it as such. I'll just give you two examples. One is, I don't know if some of you have seen that iconic photo by the photographer Raghu Rai, Burial of an Unknown Child. This is incredible. You can just Google up and you'll find it. It's an image of this child who died in the Bhopal gas tragedy. And it's just buried the face. The eyes are still open. And it's kind of buried in a field of debris. It's a devastating photo. It's a devastating photo because the child's eye is still open. And anyone who knows, some of you might have seen the show Railway Men, how terrifying that tragedy was and what kind of mismanagement went into it. And these are all economic and scientific facts, but that one image of the child really moved and shocked people way more than scientific data and numbers could. And that is the power of aesthetics. That is the power of aesthetics. Even today, the Israel-Palestine war, numbers are happening, but the images of the Palestinian children, the narrative, the stories, the poetry, and somehow that moves people. Whether we are living in a world where the language moves us more or images moves us more is a different debate. But both language and images have aesthetics. And another example, a lighter example closer to home, our recent celebrity weddings, maybe all these debates about a recent celebrity wedding that we are still recovering from. I think there's a lot of talk about what kind of money that was invested and what kind of things that were wasted. But I think a lot of the criticism has come about the aesthetics. Oh my God, look at that. Look at the aesthetics of this. It's so tacky, So what I'm saying is that our political judgments are often aesthetic judgments. They're actually at heart aesthetic judgments. And this is why the judgment made in the domain of the aesthetic is no less potent than that judgment made in the domain of economics or science. And this is going to be your domain. This is going to be your domain beginning today, and you have to own it. And the tremendous power and responsibility that comes with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Majumdar. Wonderful and very thoughtful presentation, which will keep us thinking for a while, I think. I'm very happy that our registrar, Professor Dabiru Sridhar is here, and I invite him to give some concluding remarks.
I must compliment Professor Saikat Majumdar for that very inspiring and engaging talk, and that sort of, brought to centrality the need for conceptual and methodological insights, and that's in fact is one of our point of departures as we all join the School of Languages and Literature, the Dean and the Vice Chancellor, the Dean of Admissions and Outreach, and everyone in welcoming you to the school. But the powerful narrative and the message which Professor Saikat Majumdar has conveyed is that the engagement with interdisciplinarity as well, which I'm sure by now you might have heard about it a lot, but that's one of the advantages you will garner from this particular university and the school. And as this school happens to be the 11 schools of the university, Upasana, in order of establishment, so you will have even the other advantage of gaining from the schools which have been established earlier and the courses that they offer. While we are mindful of the academics that you are going to experience, But I just wanted to take inspiration from Saikat and talk to you about being kind to yourself and being humanistic, which is so very important, because when you're settling down and when you're part of a new community in terms of, getting to know new people, there might be your friends, peers and your teachers and other staff members of the university, there could be a palpable sense of anxiety and so on and so forth. But however, you must understand that these things would take time to sink in terms of even your pedagogical experiences and other social experiences. So don't be alarmed if there's anything which is new or you haven't done before or you're getting exposed for the first time in terms of your readings and in terms of the work that you're expected to do and the activities around you. You will have the fullest support from the school, from the dean and his team, including both faculty members and administrative staff members. And nonetheless, you'll also have support from other relevant departments of the university, including my own office and the office of the Vice Chancellor, because we want you to have quite an engaging time. And when I say an engaging time, not just in terms of getting good grades and all, but having a joyful experience of being a student of this university, which is indeed quite a privilege because of the array of courses that you will have, both from within the school and other schools of the university and the institutes. And you should pursue that knowledge with a certain, sense of participation, taking fullest responsibility for your learning, and likewise even understanding the heterogeneity and diversity around you and being mindful of the fact that the way you want to be appreciated, acknowledged, and respected, you would extend the same to others. Then this is going to be quite an exciting and a pleasant place for all of us, and that's what we wish for you during the period of your study over here, because in any case I'm confident you're all smart individuals and you will gain the much relevant attributes to do well in work, but even doing well in life is important, and that's what this university is going to provide you with. So on this particular note, I welcome you all once again, and I wanted to even thank Saikat for his time on a busy Monday afternoon, although he's our neighbor and he just walked across the road to join us, but nonetheless, it's a busy time for them as well, assuming that they have a new academic year and with his teaching and other professional and engagements. We are grateful to one and all for this particular talk, and we wish you a pleasant sort of stay over here and an engaging experience at the university. And I also would like to compliment Professor Dennis Slayton for setting up this lecture at such a short notice, and even thank the team from the Office of Admissions and Outreach, led by Professor Upasana Mahenta, for all the guidance and support and for the contribution in setting up this year's class of the Jindal School of Languages and Literature. Thank you so much.
And thank you for all your assistance in so many ways, and you've actually pipped me at the post because before inviting Dean Upasana Mahanta to give a vote of thanks, I wanted to especially thank her and the admissions team, our admissions director, Harsinha, and also our admissions officer, Pratik Batra, who is, oh, there he is. He's sitting behind the pillar. The admissions team, of course, brings you to us, or that is the students of the School of Languages and Literature. You're here in part because of their efforts, as well as the efforts of my colleagues in the school who interview you, the outreach visits that we do, and so on. And I'm very appreciative of the assistance we've had over the years from Professor Mahanta and her team. Upasana, please offer a vote of thanks.
I want to first thank the school, the faculty. You guys have been simply incredible in supporting the Office of Admissions and Outreach and making it possible for all the new batch of students to come here and join us here for this commencement lecture. And I truly appreciate the leadership of Dr. Dennis Layton in making it possible. So thank you very much for that. I want to thank the fresh batch of students, 2024. I also want to thank the students who are 23 batch, 22 batch, who are here today for this commencement lecture. We are here because you have put your faith in us, that you have thought that this is a course, this is an institution worth giving your time to. This is something worth pursuing. And I'm not talking only about the School of Languages and Literature, but I'm talking about O.P. Jindal Global University. So we are grateful that you have chosen us and we have chosen you. And I do hope that it is a symbiotic relationship going forward and we are able to learn with each other, to, sort of work with each other, and we are able to contribute to your process of growth as and when you decide to leave us after 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, depending on which year you are in. And so I want to tell you that we are grateful and we are there. The role of admissions and outreach, my colleague Mr. Harsh Ranjan Sinha is here, Mr. Prateek Batra is here, and on behalf of all of us, I want to say that our association with you does not end because now you have entered the School of Languages and Literature. We would continue to be there in any kind of support that you may require throughout your association here at O.P. Jindal Global University, and I do hope it is an immensely fruitful and fulfilling one. I also want to take a moment to thank our Chancellor, Mr. Naveen Jindal, Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. C. Rajkumar, you've already heard him, our Registrar, Professor Dabiru Sridhar Patnaik. Without their support and the kind of ecosystem that has been provided at the university, neither admissions nor the school administration would be able to deliver on the mandate that we have been given to deliver on. So we are very, very grateful. And most importantly, I'm very grateful to Professor Majumdar for, as Professor Patnaik said, not only taking up time from his busy schedule and addressing all our students and faculty, but also to talk about something which is extremely significant for us to engage with. Not only the question of humanities in a post-truth world, but also about perhaps the kind of responsibilities that we all bear as educators, as students, as administrators, as to understand the critical role that humanities play in the current context that we live in. And often we think, because we are students and perhaps educators and learners in the field of humanities and social sciences, we always think about the tremendous positive impacts that such an education has. But however, perhaps it is also important to engage with the possibility of humanities sometimes becoming itself a point of critique or departure for certain current concerns and challenges that we face. And therefore, the responsibility that we bear as students and educators in the field of humanities and social sciences to engage with the field with the nuance that it deserves, to engage with the field with the critical lens that is deserved. That is something that is immensely important for all of us to consider. And Professor Majumdar, there's something that you've said, apart from the fact that Shakespeare is the Karan Johar of his times, which will probably stay with me forever. The other thing that sort of stays with me is, and I think as students must stay with all of you, is that the subjectivities that we bring into our understandings and learning. So you have just finished, I'm addressing the new students, you've just done class 12. There is a very different kind of education system that you have come out of. Fortunately or unfortunately, our school education system is not the kind that encourages students to think critically. There is a lot that needs to be done despite the national education policies of the world. There's a lot that needs to be done in terms of encouraging our students at a young age to be able to think critically, to be able to question. Professor Majumdar said something that we look at our students as somebody who is critical enough to generate wealth, but not critical enough to question power, to be able to speak truth to power. And it's not easy to speak truth to power. And it needs to be done extremely responsibly. And to learn to speak truth to power will require a lot of unlearning on both your part and also on our part as educators. And I hope that both at Jindal School of Languages and Literature, at O.P. Jindal Global University, and all of us as students, learners, educators, and administrators are up to the task and the challenge. And I really do hope that we are. So thank you very much. Welcome once again. And I'm truly thrilled to have all of you here at Jindal School of Languages and Literature. Thank you. This has come to an end.